Hello, welcome back everyone. Welcome to Part 4, Module 4, Taming iOS and Android with Enterprise Mobility Suite. Simon's done a great job so far talking about iOS, but we're going to spend the next 49 minutes or so talking about Android and managing Android in a very similar vein to what we talked about with iOS, but of course with some caveats, some differences, and things that of course you as IT managers focusing on those types of devices as well in your environment should want to know. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Simon, and he's going to talk about how to manage Android.
Yeah, so for a start, we are going to run exactly the same kind of module agenda that we did for the previous module. So we're going to start off by looking at enrollment and provisioning on Android. It's actually not that different or dissimilar from iOS. Then we're going to have a look at policy. That is where things do tend to veer off quite differently from what the capabilities that we have as regard to the Android platform. And then we're going to have a look at application management, again, very different from what we can do on iOS. And then we'll take a look at unenrollment. And again, because policy and application management is different on Android, it's going to be different in this case. Now, just to set one or two things up from the beginning, Android in and of itself is less manageable than iOS because it's just not got some of the deep and rich enterprise hooks in it that iOS actually has. So as a result, you often see it deployed along with Knox from Samsung. Unfortunately, we're not going to be using Samsung Knox for this particular case, and we will have something on that a little bit later on. But Samsung Knox has its own management platform anyway, which makes it an interesting place to be in. So we're just going to be looking at at Android management with Microsoft Intune, which is what you're going to come across anyway with the vast majority of devices that are brought in a bring your own device style enrollment. And let's just have a very quick think about the enrollment approach for Android. Unlike with iOS, we actually don't have the ability to use a configurator, one doesn't exist, or be able to get a vendor to be able to create and deploy the management profile to the devices for us. So it puts us into a situation where we either use the service management account, the device enrollment manager, or we go through the self-service portal-based enrollment. So when we start to think about what kind of things we can do with those devices, well, the corporate managed devices, we might be thinking about using them from a kiosk-based environment, so really locking them down with the profiles and policies that we can put in place. We might also be setting policies around the apps that we're going to target to the particular device and allowing an app install or deny list. Of course, the app install or deny list is again something that on an Android device we can't actually enforce, so kind of a little bit tricky. When we start to think about how this works, again, we use exactly the same company portal. And again, it's going to take all of the exact same stuff that we talked about in the iOS module. So it's going to take all of the branding that you've set up in ConfigMan and Intune, or just in Intune. It's going to use all of the colors, have all of the information, all of that rich information that a user is going to need. Because it's Android, there's no need to go through the process of getting an APN certificate from Apple in order to be able to manage a device. You can just manage those devices, which is kind of nice. The App Store, the company portal itself, is a little customizable in as much as you can add the applications in there that you want to, and you'll also be able to see all of the other devices that any user has actually enrolled. One of the other things that's been added into Windows Intune very recently is actually the ability to be able to go through and set a custom set of end-user agreements for users. So once they enroll a device, you can actually change all the messages that they're seeing, so that instead of seeing Contoso, they're seeing your company name. That actually makes it so that you can set things like an illegal agreement in place with HR or your legal department in order to have everything stacked up in the right direction. We can also use the exact same conditional access to email approach that we used for enrollment a little earlier. In the case of our device, we can have exactly that same process of everything working with conditional access, and we'll just let those animations click through for a second whilst they all kind of kick into place. It means that we have that very nice, simple enrollment approach, whether you're on Office 365 or on an on-premises Exchange server. Exactly the same things work in both scenarios, so we can always move through a place where a user can't have data existing on the device which isn't managed by the organization. exactly where we want to get to. It also leads to that very intuitive end user experience, so there's no kind of need for devices to get particularly non-compliant. And again, we'll just let the Exchange on premises slide move itself through the build. There we go. Okay. So let's think about bulk enrollment for a little bit. Let's think about what we can do with regards to doing the bulk enrollment process on a device. First off, we need to configure an account, which is going to be our bulk enrollment user account. We then need to set Microsoft Intune to recognize that account as being a bulk enrollment account. And then we need to set up the policies and the configuration that we're going to apply to our bulk enrolled devices. In this case, I'm going to take you through doing that inside of Intune in order to be able to set up a device management environment for enrolling maybe corporate-owned devices into your environment that are running Android. So, let's have a quick look at that. I'm going to move into my Intune console here for a second, and I'm just starting off on a page very particularly. I've actually paused this process partway through by just capturing this page, and you can see here this is the device, the Laurie's iPad that we unenrolled in the previous module. And the reason for doing this is somebody asked the question, can you get any kind of auditing over whether a device has yet been remotely wiped or wiped from the device itself? Well, as you can see in this case, we're actually seeing that the device is being deleted. It's telling us inside of the admin console that it's being deleted, and it'll appear in reports as well as a device which is being deleted. Now, until the device actually, we know that it's no longer reporting into Microsoft Intune, we actually can see that the device is in that state of being removed, and this device will live here until the device confirms that it's completed the removal process. So if I actually refresh this report, you'll probably see that device has completed its removal, but that's not really what we're here to see anyway. We're actually here to set up our access to the environment. So I'm going to go into another version of the console. I'm just going to go to account.manage.microsoft.com, and this is the account management portal for my Intune environment. And that's slightly different from the device management portal that we were in a second ago. So this allows me to configure parts of my my environment, things like my Azure Active Directory tenant. I can configure my users. I can assign. I can do much of what I can also do through Azure Active Directory, but I can do it directly inside of the account portal. And I can also go through and specifically assign licenses to certain users. If we scroll down a little here, we'll see that we actually have a device manager user account just here, and that is a user that I've created just by going new, add user, and I've literally filled them out with details. I provided a username and I've assigned them a Microsoft Intune license. Having done that, I now have my device manager account. So I go back into Microsoft Intune, go down to administration, and then here you'll see that I have a device enrollment managers option. And you can see that it's at one of the administrative roles. We have service administrators and tenant administrators, and also device enrollment managers. I literally have to click add, type in the username, the UPN for this particular user, my device manager user, and that has now added my device manager at fakeurlco.com user and set them up. They're now able to enroll as many devices as we need to on this particular device. So you might have a deployment factory and somebody's going to go through and literally log into every device to apply the profile. So the next thing that we're going to do is go to groups. Why are we going to groups? Well, in this case, when we deploy anything, be it an application or a policy to users inside or devices inside of Intune, we do that through the process of deploying to a group. So inside of all users, I've actually just created a new user called Device Manager. And that user, you can see, has added 0 devices at this point in time. Inside of that group, let's do view properties. We'll see no devices associated, but we've actually applied we've actually added the device manager user to that particular group. The next thing that we need to do is go and apply something to that. So if we go to policy, and we'll explore policy in a few moments' time, a little bit more detail. We'll go down to configuration policies, and here you'll see we have a policies to automatically configure email on a Knox device. Knox actually has hooks to enable us to be able to do that through MDM. We've also set up a bulk policy for Android. Let's go and have a quick look at what we've set inside of that policy. And you can see that we're not really doing very much inside of the policy at all. Let's go back again. We also have policies, a basic mobile policy, which applies to every single device that's ever enrolled into our Intune environment. So if we now move across to our Android device, in just a second, hopefully. I'm going to just make sure that we can see this. Later. Okay, let's just move across to our Android device, and now we'll be able to see exactly what we're dealing with here. So if we're going to email, for a start, you'll see that I'm in a quarantine state. I've had my quarantine notification email arrive in my inbox, and that Contoso message section is the message that has been custom set up by my Intune administrators for my tenant. So, being as it's actually blocked, let's go into the company portal. Again, we've just downloaded this from the Google Play Store. The very first thing it says is that before you can use it, you need to sign in with an organisational account. So let's go add this device. And then we're going to use Device Manager. And we'll just very quickly type in the super secret password, and we'll move over to the slide deck for a second while we do that.
Typing with your thumbs is always so much fun, isn't it?
It is. It's always kind of interesting to try and get through that process. And there we go. We've successfully done that. So it's now just adding the device, adding it to adding the there we go. And we get to see that the company portal is going to become a device administrator, which is the parlance for an Android device. And we can see all of the things that it may want to allow us to do. And you can see that the actual ability to set virtually everything on the device appears for the company portal. And then once that's been added, we're going to be able to remotely manage the device, manage our other devices from this device. And that's going to be interesting as a device manager, because the device manager role actually loses some abilities. For example, I won't be able to see the other devices that I'm managing. I won't be able to remotely wipe my devices because I've been enrolled using the device manager profile. Let's make sure that that's not going to sleep for me. Okay, there we go. So we can see a slightly different view of the portal this time. We have the categories, we have the apps. So I can go into categories. I'll see that I have productivity apps, and I actually have OneNote published for this particular application. I can also see my devices, but in this case I can only see this one device. I wouldn't be able to see anything else that was added. You'll notice that the blue squares for managing devices are missing from this front screen entirely. So now that the device manager has added the device, we're going to actually realise and unblock that device for conditional access to email as well. So email will in a few moments begin flowing down to this device as expected. So let's move back to the slide decks for a few moments. And we'll talk about policy. So what can we do in terms of policy on an Android device? Well, there's a bunch of stuff that we can do. The first thing is that we can obviously do things like setting passwords. We can also force the device to be encrypted. By default, Android devices aren't encrypted. We can also push down the ability to configure system settings, turn off cloud backup, maybe even prevent videos that are taken on the device from being automatically uploaded to YouTube. We can also configure accounts and synchronization on the device. Email can be configured, but only in the case that the device is actually running Samsung Knox and not just running Android. We can also configure the browser, the applications, the hardware, and things like cellular and roaming. So everything that you'd expect to be able to configure policy-wise with a mobile device. In terms of being able to distribute applications to the device, well, we can do that in just a couple of ways. We can do the APK files for sideloading an Android application. So if we have a custom line of business application developed just for our Android devices, then we can deploy the APK. We can also deploy deep links and web apps. Now, notice at the moment that last box, the Managed Store application box, actually isn't currently enabled. So we don't have the ability at the moment to be able to wrap an application for Android and be able to deploy it through the company portal. As a result, that means that in order to be able to get an application onto the device, manual intervention by the user is required. When we think about being able to allow and block apps on a particular device, again, we have exactly that same situation where an Android device will only audit report back the information about the apps that have been installed onto the particular device. So let's have a quick think about being able to provide some of those policies down to a device using Microsoft Intune. And let's explore some of the policies that we can put in place in a little bit more detail. And then we'll flip over and have a look at the exact same policies inside of Configuration Manager. So first off, let's take a look in Intune. So we very quickly went through the ability to, we saw the email profile, but I'm going to actually go to Add this time, and I'm going to create a new policy. The very first thing I see is Android policies, so we'll go into there and actually turn these things on. So we can create an Android configuration policy. Let's hit Create Pol. So in this case, we're going to give a policy a unique name. Then we can actually say very, very few things inside here. So we can turn on compliant and non-compliant apps list for Android. In the case of Knox, this would actually be enforced, but in the case of Android, this would actually just be an audit option. So we can add in a specific application that we don't want devices to be able to use, or we can specifically only allow a device to run these applications. Of course, it's only going to flag an audit violation. It's not going to enforce that policy. You can import your apps from a CSV file if necessary, or you just need to get hold of the name of the application, so for example Skype, and then go ahead, do a google.com search and search for Skype for Android, and you'll very quickly find Skype for Android tablet. All we need to do is grab the URL, back over to our policy, and then it's going to say that's the wrong URL. So it's going to force us to take the correct URL from the page, which is always kind of handy. Let's go get this one. Copy this shortcut. Add it again. Say OK. And then this time it's going to accept it. So it's always doing checks to make sure that things are as expected. Again, we can enable a kiosk mode, but only if we're on Samsung Knox. So we can select a specific application, which is always going to be run. And we can also say which particular physical buttons on the device are going to be available. So very little that we can actually do in that case. I'm going to cancel that policy and add another type of policy. Just browse through some of these. So we can add an email profile for Samsung Knox. We'll go create this policy. And in this case, again, so Knox email 2, what we can do is say which particular servers are going to be required inside of ActiveSync and provide the account name. We can say whether or not we're going to use SMIME, and we can provide a signing certificate. At the moment, we have no SCEP profiles in place for Android. I'll cover that in a couple of seconds. We can also say when the information is going to be synchronized for that email account. Now, let's just go back and add another type of policy. We can go and add a SCEP certificate policy. This would allow us to actually deploy a certificate out to our device in order that every email that the user sends that is then signed with that certificate can be trusted by the recipient. In the case of being able to do this, we might need to go and deploy something called NDES, which is the ability to deploy a certificate enrollment server behind the firewall that Intune will then manage the process of asking to go and get a certificate on behalf of the end user. We can also deploy trusted certificate profiles for Android, and we can deploy VPN and Wi-Fi profiles. Now, whilst we're in here, let's take a quick look at iOS, and we see much the same thing. We can set up iOS profiles, the SCEP, the trusted certificate, the VPN and the Wi-Fi, and we can also set a custom configuration policy for iOS. There are more policy settings as well, stored down in common mobile device management settings. So let's go and do that and create that with a custom policy. In this case, what we can do, let's type custom pol. Let's custom pol. Let's go through this very quickly and just see what's there. One of the things that's worth noting is that for each one of these settings, because they apply to multiple different types of devices, actually we can say I'm going to apply this, and we're going to see which platforms it's going to apply on inside of the UI. So the way of thinking about this is that the mobile device policy applies to all platforms, and then the custom policies are unique to a particular individual platform. So here we can say that if we go down, we can start to go through the encryption requirements, the malware requirements. We can see some of the system requirements, the ability to save data into the cloud or not. We can also say whether Google Accounts autosync is configured or not. Obviously, in setting certain things up like this, it's going to work on NOC standard. It's not going to work on iOS in these cases. And then as we go down, we can obviously set up specific settings for email, and the browser configuration, and the app configuration, gaming and hardware, and various different features around cellular. All completely documented on TechNet as well, so you can go through all of the details for everything that's added in there. The next policy that I want to show you, though, is actually the very next thing that I want to show is that before we can take one of these policies, after we've built it, we then need to go and deploy the policy. We can deploy a policy either to users or to groups. So in this case, user groups or to devices. So in this case, most of my policies are actually deployed out to my direct managed devices groups, but I could also be deploying them out to individual users or individual groups. It gives you the flexibility to be able to say, users in this particular department need this particular set of settings. So before we move off from the policy settings page, let's have a quick look at our Exchange ActiveSync policy here for conditional access. Essentially, what this is saying is this is allowing me to put a policy in place that says block access from Exchange unless that device has been registered with Microsoft Intune. And I'm going to do that for all of my users inside of my environment. I could say that only users inside of a particular high-risk group, for example, needed to go through this process. I could also set up a group like a group that contains my CIO, my CEO, all those kind of people that we know are completely trustworthy and never break or bend any of the rules. And we could create an exempted group just to allow those users' devices to not have to go through the same hoops for enrollment. And then further down as well, we can set platform exceptions. So in the case of setting a platform exception, what we could say is we're going to allow all devices in order to be into this environment, except we want to prevent any Samsung SMP600 devices from being able to enroll. So that's going to now block any Samsung SMP600 devices from access to corporate email, no matter what. And that gives you the ability to say, actually, I'm not entirely comfortable with this particular type of device, so maybe I don't want it in my environment at this point. I'm going to cancel all of that, and we'll leave that in place. And then finally, it lets us configure the default rule. And the default rule is actually the rule that's automatically set by your Exchange admins. It's the rule that's set for when devices are allowed to enroll inside of Exchange. You probably don't want to move this away from the allow devices to access Exchange option. Otherwise, this would actually prevent most devices from being able to do a conditional access enrollment through Exchange ActiveSync. So that's a walkthrough of the policy that we can put in place on our Microsoft Intune account. What about the policy that we can put in place from ConfigMan? Well, let's go grab a ConfigMan server from just here. Now, in this particular case, you can see that inside of my extensions for Windows Intune option inside of config-man. This is an environment which has been built for quite a while, and it's pulled down a load of extensions. So it's actually pulled down the extensions that have settings for email profiles. It's pulled down the settings for iOS 7 and 8 security settings. So that now means that I can create policy that will apply to those devices. If we go to the Assets and Compliance node and pull down compliance settings, what I can do is provide different types of access. So I can set up access to company resources. So in here, for example, I can go and configure email deployments. So I can say here that we're going to set up the fake URL email for every device which is targeted by this particular email profile. We're going to connect it up to Exchange ActiveSync and use the user's user principal name from Active Directory in order to set up the synchronization. We're going to synchronize email, contacts, and calendar, and we're going to deploy out to these supported platforms. Notice that Android isn't listed because we can't do an Android deployment for these particular email settings. Knox also isn't listed, although will be coming in the future. If we go down to VPN profiles, again, we can do the exact same thing. However, if this time we go to the Contoso VPN connection, go to supported platforms, and again, we don't have the ability to add that to Android. And let's have a quick look at the ability to do that for however, Wi-Fi profiles we can add on an Android device. So there are certain limitations in what we can and can't push down, and that's purely based on what the device is ready to receive at this point. We can also go to configuration items, and inside of configuration items we can configure things to be, we can put any kinds of device settings in place that are supported by our environment. So let's go down to mobile device settings, new policy, and say next. So in this case we can say that we want a password policy, we want to include device settings, we want to manage email, and we want to secure cloud. Say next, and then it gives us the options for what we're going to configure. So let's set a minimum password length of 4 characters on all of our devices. Say next again. Let's set that voice dialing is prohibited, and next again. And let's say that our email formats, we're going to prohibit people from using POP IMAP email. We'll say next again. And then we can say where the encrypted backup is going to be stored. Next again. Then we can say which platforms we want to apply this set of configuration items to. Now notice, it's not going to apply to everything. When I click the next button, it will actually come back with a report, which I can export, of all of the supported settings on every single platform. So if we just scroll this right a little bit, what we'll see is that not everything that I've set is actually going to be supported on Android. In fact, very, very little of it is actually supported on the Android platform. So that's how I can set up and explore and provide a configuration platform through Configuration Manager. I can also do one more thing, which is go to mobile devices, type in some random characters, and next again. And then I can configure additional settings that are not the default in the settings group. And then in this case, if I go and get the device platform, so in this case Android's application configuration details, they have an SDK which lists everything that can be possibly configured on a device. We can actually add in anything which has been added, which maybe Configuration Manager or Intune doesn't natively support. And we can do that by specifying a very specific XML configuration, which is only ever listed inside of that platform document. So it allows you to have maximum flexibility around what you're being able to deliver. So let's move back to the slides for a second, and then we can start thinking about the next section, application management. Well, application management is actually not a huge area on Android today with EMS. We have the ability to be able to take an application and publish it. We have the ability to take an application and sideload it, but we can't create that managed approach at the moment. And we won't be able to until the Windows Intune SDK is available. So let's go and have a look at creating applications inside of config-man. So back inside of my config console, I'm on my software library, and here you can see that I have a whole bunch of applications already provisioned inside of my environment. Let's go and take a very quick look at some of these apps. Now if we go to deployment types, it'll list some of what's available. So here we can see that the deployment types are appearing as Windows Phone packages, Office applications, and the Office application in this case is the Microsoft Office application for Android. We can see the RDP client. But you notice that this does something in a slightly more holistic way than we do in Microsoft Intune. What we're actually doing here is setting up an application and having many versions of the application for each platform. That's one of the things that we put in place for you as the administrator inside of ConfigMan. So if I go down here and select the Android application, go and select Properties, and we can literally see that the content is just the location on the store. So I'm just going to copy that for a second, and we're going to create a new application to walk this through. Go up to Home, Create Application. You can see all the different types that we can deploy. We're going to deploy an app package on the Android store, provide the URL, say next, it goes off and pulls the information from the Android store. We can provide our own information as well. Say next, next. And then in a second or two we can hit the finish button, and that's going to have completed the process of actually publishing that application out to our Android devices. So we're kind of limited in what we can do on the platform at the moment, and it is the platform that limits what we're able to do on Android today. So let's have a quick look and think about what we can do in regards to unenrollment. Unenrollment on all of the devices is actually exactly the same as it was on the iOS device. So we have the ability to take off any of the information which has been pushed down by the MAM solution or the MDM solution, and we also have the ability to do a complete device wipe if we need to. So the ability to do selective or full. And on that note, there's actually not a lot more we can do other than go and unenroll the device. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go and do that from the, I think we'll move across to the Intune environment in order to make that happen. Let's just go along to here. And then let's go and find one of the devices that we have enrolled inside of our environment. Let's go take a look at our devices. Let's go all computers and do devices. That's all mobile devices and select devices. Okay, so a few little things here that are quite interesting to take note of. We have the ability to do a little bit of looking here at what devices run, and we can do this live, or we can do these as part of our running of reports. So we can say we want to know which devices have been jailbroken or rooted. We can also take a look at which devices have been inactive or quarantined from Exchange, and where we have individual access exemptions in place. We can also look at devices where retire failed. So we can see that actually nothing failed on these devices, and that would show us devices where maybe, for example, we have started to unenroll the device, but it for some reason didn't actually work out. Let's go do all devices, none. Okay, and we can see our Android device just here. So what can we do with this? Well, we can do a retire and wipe, but there's also a couple of other tasks we can run as well. We can also run remote tasks to be able to remotely lock and reset the passcode on the device. I'm going to do a wipe. Let's go and wipe the device before retiring. Yes. And that, in this case, is going to do a full wipe of my Android device. So that's going to go to my device, completely wipe off everything that's on that particular individual device. I could have just selected not to check the checkbox there, and it would have just done a wipe where it would take off everything that had been laid down by the MDM software. So it would have taken off the email profile, but it wouldn't have taken off, for example, any applications that I'd taken from the company portal, because they're individual applications and they're not managed at this point in time. So we can now see that that device is in the process of retiring. And if we go and take hold of the filters that are available to us here, we can see devices that are retiring, and it will filter down to just the ones that we've set into a retiring state until the point at which it actually clears itself down and completely wipes it. So that kind of takes us to the end of what's possible with Android devices from a management point of view. Very much more limited than what we can do with iOS devices at this point in time, but it does give you the capabilities to be able to manage those devices in a bring your own device type of environment. And as we move through to, let's just move ourselves through the end of the slide deck, we've moved back to the Q&A, so let's have a quick look at any questions that have come in towards the end of the session. Can we get a list of what features are not supported on each platform? That's kind of really tricky, but if you take a look at TechNet, you'll see a list of what features we do support on each platform. We can't really list every single feature that could possibly exist on those platforms, but that we don't support. We can actually list the ones that we do have support for inside of the platform really easily, and it's all documented on TechNet, and it's really easy to find that documentation directly from within the Microsoft Intune portal. How quickly could application configuration be implemented, or could they be scheduled? Actually, you can set a schedule time from within Configuration Manager for when you want applications to start applying to a device. From within Intune at the moment, you can't actually set up a particular schedule to say this needs to happen at 3 p.m. on a Thursday. Totally possible to do that from within Config Man though, at this point in time. Just looking down the questions very quickly. Is there anything else that we can answer that remains unanswered on the jump start? Okay, I'm actually looking down that. There's not a lot that we can answer really quickly right now, so we'll bring the jump start to a close. Don't forget, on the portal just below where you can see the video, there's a small survey. It would be really helpful if you can just fill that out, let us know how we did. The best answer to click is the one right at the top. Don't click the one at the bottom. Bad things happen if you click the option at the bottom. Do click the option that is right at the top underneath the screen. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next time, on the next Jumpstart.
All right, yeah, thank you all for attending. Thank you again to our people that helped us with the Q&A in the back end too. Those guys did an amazing job, so I really appreciate. I'm not going to get all the names, but I know Tommy and Jessica and Blaine were all in there. So team, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And all you also, thank you for attending.